Chapter 13. A hushed and reverent silence enveloped them as Destina and the others entered the temple. Words were carved in Solemnic above the entrance, and Destina read them aloud. "The love and understanding of the gods enfolds you in a comforting embrace. Know that whatever mistakes you made, the gods love you and forgive you." Destina felt the tumult in her soul ease, as if loving arms enveloped her, blessed and cherished her. The gods were with her, embracing and enfolding her, forgiving her, understanding her. The temple of the High Clerist is dedicated to the patron gods of the Knights of Salamnia, Paladine, Kirijolith, and Habakkuk, and the goddess Mishakal. Magus was saying, "You see the statues at the far end of the temple? Paladine stands in the center in the form of a platinum dragon with outstretched wings, either attacking or protecting. The flames of the 4 candles burning on his altar never die and never need replenishing. To his left, his consort, Mishakal, is portrayed as a woman holding a child in her arms, for she is a goddess of healing and the protector of children. Pilgrims often leave gifts of toys on her altar, which the priests distribute to the poor. Kirijolith stands on Paladine's right. The god is represented as a bison, strong and powerful, the god of unity and honorable warfare. His twin brother Habakkuk is on Mishakal's left. His statue is a phoenix, rising from the flames, newborn. He represents the promise of the spirit rising from death to embark on a new journey." He glanced at Raistlin. "The god of magic Solinary is not represented in this temple, despite the fact that he is brother to Kirijolith and Habakkuk." "Not surprising," said Raistlin. Tas was wandering around the pews, tapping on the floor with his hoopak and staring up at the ceiling. He came back to them, scratching his head. "This is all very strange. I swear on my topknot that when I was here with Lorna, there were only walls with teeth." The cantor's voice echoed among the stars. 2 figures they had not previously noticed were standing at the altar of Kirijolith and turned to look at them. The light of the candle shone on their armor, and Raistlin recognized Huma and Sturm. Huma said something to Sturm, who turned and came forward to greet them. Huma remained standing at the altar, his head bowed. "Magus, Huma would like you to join him at the altar," Sturm said as he approached. "I don't suppose he plans to address my complaint about Solinary?" said Magus. "I don't believe so," said Sturm. "A pity," said Magus as he walked down the aisle to join his friend. Sturm waited until Magus had moved out of earshot before speaking. "I heard what Tas said. He is right. When I was here, this chamber was a death trap, not a temple." "You see," said Tas, "I was telling the truth. I don't think Magus believed me." "Magus knows the truth?" Sturm asked, frowning. "As much of it as he needs to know," said Raistlin. "I told you I would have to tell him." Sturm shook his head and continued to gaze around the temple. "Why do you suppose the knights would tear down such a beautiful temple and replace it with death traps?" "Perhaps the dragon's attack at Westgate Pass had something to do with it," said Raistlin. "The knights had learned that the gods could not protect them from dragons, and they had much better rely on death traps." Sturm started to chastise Raistlin for speaking sacrilege, but he was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Belgrave and Will. The commander stopped. He seemed surprised to see them. "Hello, Commander," Tas said, extending his hand. Titus grunted at him and put his hand on the hilt of his sword. His expression was grim. "You're all here. Good. I need to speak to the lot of you." He glanced at the altar where Hickman and Magus were in conversation. "I do not like to interrupt their prayers, but this is a matter of urgency." "You do not disturb us, Commander," said Hickman, ascending the series of stairs that led to where they were standing. "How may we assist you?" "Come outside," said Titus. "I see no need to trouble the gods with this matter." Titus had entered through Knight's Gate, which led from the fortress into the temple. He led them out the front entrance, Noble's Gate, and into a courtyard surrounded by the half-completed curtain wall covered in scaffolding. The day was cool and overcast. Grey clouds shrouded the top of the high clere's tower. Titus turned his grim gaze on Magus and Racing. "Will tell me that, according to the jailer, you two spoke to the spy we captured, despite the fact that I explicitly ordered you not to do so. The prisoner complained that you mistreated him." "We merely asked him a question or two," said Magus. "He answered quite readily, which I found rather disappointing. I had been looking forward to gouging out his eyes with a red-hot poker." "He's jesting," said Hickman. Titus was not amused. "Did either of you wizards speak to the elf women?" "I did not," said Magus, "although now I wish I had, since it so clearly annoys you." "I treated her wound," said Racing. "Naturally I asked how she was feeling. I trust that is not against a measure." Tasselhoff waved his hand. "I went to the dungeon to see Gwyneth. I had to ask her about the song because it's not going the way it's supposed to go. I told her how to fix it." "Indeed? What did you tell her, Kender?" Titus asked. "You can call me Tas," said Tas. "Everyone does. The knights need weapons to fight the Dark Queen, and I told Gwyneth they could find them in the gnome village where Uncle Trapspringer and the gnomes are forging the magical Dragonlances. I told her she needs to go pick them up." "I also visited her. Why are we being interrogated like common criminals, Commander?" Hickman asked, growing angry. Titus rubbed his jaw. "The elf woman has escaped. She's gone. I went down to release her and found the jailer locked in her cell." "Escaped?" Hickman repeated, disbelieving. "But that is not possible. How could she?" "The commander suspects one of us helped her," said Magus. "Is that true, Commander?" Hickman asked. "I do not think she grew wings and flew out," said Titus dryly. "Gwyneth wouldn't grow wings because she already has them," Tas offered helpfully. Titus cast him a baleful look and shook his head. "I went to visit her, Commander," Hickman stated. "I opened her cell and went inside to make certain she was all right. The jailer locked me in. Gwyneth and I spoke for a long time. She was there when I left." Hickman paused. "And now you say she is gone?" Titus studied him intently. Hickman was clearly upset. Magus saw his friend's distress and drew Titus's attention to himself. "If you doubt him, Commander, you can confirm his story with the jailer or the other prisoner." "Sir Hickman's word is all the assurance I need," said Titus. "But someone must have helped the elf escape." "Gwyneth wouldn't need any help," said Tas, glad to be of assistance. "She's a silver dragon, which means she could fly away." "I'm sorry, Lady Destina," said Titus. "I give your Kender a chance, but he is the only one who could have released her. Take him to the dungeon, Will, and tell the jailer to keep watch on him." "You can't lock him up. You have no reason. Tas is telling the truth," Destina protested. "That the woman is a silver dragon?" Titus snorted. "What I meant, sir, is that Tas is telling the truth about not setting her free," said Destina stubbornly. "There must be another explanation." "My decision stands," said Titus. He bowed to her and walked off, heading west, back in the direction of the fortress. Will dragged Tass away, still protesting his innocence. Magus rested his hand on Huma's arm. "I am sorry, my friend." "I cannot believe Gwyneth fled," said Huma, anguished. "Perhaps it is my fault. Perhaps I said or did something that frightened her. I'm going to speak to the jailer, find out what he knows." Huma hurried off to catch up with Will and Tasselhoff. Magus stood, leaning on his staff, thoughtfully gazing after his friend. "He's in pain, but perhaps it is for the best. There can be no future for a romance between a human and an elf, can there? You're from the future. Perhaps you can enlighten me?" Sturm looked grave. Destina touched the pewter fastening on her collar, then let her hand drop. "You know we cannot," said Raistlin. "Well, I tried," said Magus, smiling. "When should we leave for the tower, brother? I must collect my spell components, but I will be ready after that." "I have to talk to my friends, then gather my own spell components," said Raistlin. "Meet me in my room when you are ready. I will wait for you there." Magus crossed the courtyard, walking swiftly, his staff tapping on the paving stones. "Tass doesn't belong in a cell," said Destina. "He's telling the truth." "Quite the irony, since it's probably one of the few times in his life he's ever done so," said Raistlin. "Leave him be, lady. A dungeon is the best place for Tasselhoff. We know where he is, at least until the novelty of being locked up wears off. Hopefully I will have returned by then. I'm traveling to Palanthas with Magus to obtain the device." "The city is in the hands of the Minotaurs," Sturm pointed out. "You and Magus are both taking a great risk." "We will be safe enough," Raistlin assured him. "Magical portals will take us directly to the tower. The moment I have the device, I will return, so be prepared to depart, perhaps within the hour." "But what do we tell Huma and Commander Belgrave?" Sturm asked. "We cannot simply disappear. That might cause further harm." "We will tell them the truth for a change," said Raistlin. "We are going home." Chapter 14. Magus and Raistlin returned to their rooms in the High Clerist's tower to collect spell components and other equipment they would need on their journey. "Where should we cast a portal spell?" Raistlin asked. "We need someplace where we won't be disturbed." "I was thinking we could use the library," said Magus. "When Huma and I visited the tower, I would go there to study my spellbooks. I can guarantee we won't be disturbed. It is located on the 14th floor. 14th? Raistlin repeated, aghast, thinking of the long climb. Magus laughed. "You don't think I'm going to climb 14 flights of stairs, do you? I'm far too lazy. Take hold of my staff. I will carry us both." As Raistlin grasped the staff, Magus spoke the word, "Bankat." At the command, the staff lifted them off the ground. They floated up the stairwell with as much ease as if they'd been made of smoke. Raistlin sighed deeply. He'd known that the staff would allow him to fall as lightly as a feather, but he had not known it could give him the power to fly. He wished to the gods that there was some way he could impart this knowledge to his future self. What if they escaped without having altered time when he returned to the Raistlin in the inn of the last home that autumn evening? He would have no memory of this encounter. Arriving at the 14th level, Magus spoke to the staff, "Aki," and they settled lightly to the floor. They arrived in pitch darkness and eerie silence. Magus lit the crystal on the staff. "The tower's upper floors are considerably smaller than those below," said Magus, shining the light around. "This floor has only a few rooms, but, as you can see, they are sumptuous. The high-ranking priests lived on this level, including the High Clerist. They have their own private dining hall and bedchambers. The library is this way." They entered a small rotunda adorned with a fresco that featured a knight flanked by 2 kingfishers flying through the heavens. The knight held the sun in his hands, shedding light on Solamnia, represented by a map done in mosaic tiles on the floor. As Raistlin started to walk across it, Magus suddenly stopped him. "Look at the map." The tiles that formed the map were black, save for a patch of shining silver located in the center. Magus tapped the silver tiles with his staff. "The High Clearest Tower," said Magus. "This map was blessed by Kiri-Jolith. I have heard it said that in time of war the god would reveal the positions of enemy forces. According to this, the dark tiles represent the Dark Queen. As you see, her forces occupy all of Solamnia except for this patch of ground, and we cannot withstand her might." He glanced at Raistlin. "You're right. You and your friends need to leave." The door to the library stood open. The room was semicircular, following the curve of the wall. Sunlight shone through mullioned windows on the north side. The library smelled pleasantly of leather and vellum. Bookshelves stood along the walls, extending from the floor to the ceiling. Students could sit at tables or at ink-spattered desks, furnished with round holes to accommodate inkwells. Those who simply wanted to lose themselves in a book could relax in comfortable leather chairs. Raistlin closed the door and cast a locking spell on it, while Magus shoved the furniture to one side to provide a bare space on one of the walls. The level was deserted, but, as one does instinctively in a library, the two spoke softly. "I always loved this place," said Magus, looking around with pleasure. "I felt at home here, amidst the books and silence." The staff's light illuminated row after row of books bound in different colors of leather or cloth, some stamped with gold leaf, others simply plain. The knights encouraged everyone who lived and worked in the tower to use the library to improve their knowledge, said Magus. The head librarian kept all neat and orderly. He knew every single volume and where it belonged, and the gods help you if you put a book back on the wrong shelf. Magus sighed. "I do not like to think what will happen to the library if the tower falls. The Dark Queen prefers her subject to live in ignorance. Knowledge is her foe. Time is also our foe," Raistlin said, ignoring Magus's attempt to gain information. "We should proceed with the spell casting." Magus smiled and removed an ornate key from a fob he wore on his belt. He held it to the light. "What is a key for?" Raistlin asked curiously. "I never knew a key to be part of the portal spell." "One could say this is a key to the front door of the Tower of High Sorcery in Palanthas," Magus replied. "The previous master gave keys to all of us who passed the test. She encouraged us to return to the tower to study or simply spend time in the company of our fellow mages. Sadly, she died shortly after that. The current master, a white robe named Snackby, ended the policy. He gave keys only to members of the conclave, one of the many little favors he did for them so they would elect him master. I have to give him credit," Magus added with a curl of his lip. "Snacksby is a skilled politician, even if he is a mediocre mage. Since I was not a member of the conclave, nor do I ever want to be, Snacksby ordered me to return my key. When I refused to relinquish it, he forbade me from entering the tower without his permission. I told him in quite graphic detail what he could do with his permission. Then I left. I haven't been back since." "And how do we persuade this man who loathes you to give us a dragon orb and the device of time journeying?" Raistlin asked, alarmed. "Do you have a plan?" "I have something better than a plan," said Magus serenely. "I have luck." He placed the key in the palm of his left hand, passed his right hand over it as he whispered words of magic beneath his breath. A portal opened like a window in the wall, permitting them to see inside an unfurnished chamber, austere but elegant, with a floor formed of red, black, and white marble tiles. "The entry foyer," said Magus, pleased. "You said you lived in this tower. Do you recognize it?" Rayson shook his head. "I lived in the tower years after a black-robed wizard cursed it, and then leaped off the top and impaled himself on the sharp finials of the iron fence below. His blood transformed the tower from the most beautiful of the 5 towers of high sorcery to the most hideous." "Why would the man do such a mad thing?" Magus asked, shocked. "A long story," said Rayson. "I look forward to seeing the tower as it once was. I will enter first and hold the portal open for you. Be quick." As he started to take a step inside the portal, it slammed shut and disappeared, causing him to walk headlong into the wall. Magus rubbed his nose and swore, "Damn Snacksby to the abyss and back!" "What happened?" Rayson asked. "Did the spell fail?" "The fool Snacksby has sealed the portal shut," said Magus. "Now no one can enter. I should have known the cowardly wretch would do something inane like this." "How do we get inside?" Rayson asked in dismay. "The old-fashioned way," Magus said grimly. "We must walk. But that means we will have to travel to an enemy-occupied city, and if we escape being captured by minotaurs, we must pass through the dread Shoiken Grove," Rayson said. "Not the most pleasant experience, but we have no choice if we want to obtain our objectives," Magus said. "Do not worry, the Grove will let us pass." "The Grove will let you pass," Rayson said grimly. "I have taken the test, but I did so in my past, which is in the future, and thus has not yet happened." "An interesting point," said Magus. "Consider this. Lunitary knows you are here in this time. She must know, for she has granted you the ability to cast spells. In her eyes, you have passed the test." "True," said Rayson, musing. "I had not thought of that." "Since you have the sanction of the goddess, the Grove should allow you to enter," Magus concluded. "And if not, the Grove will kill me," Rayson said. "The Master will return your effects to your loved ones," Magus said in soothing tones. "He will even neatly fold your robes and cleanse out the blood." Rayson could not help but smile. "So, how do we proceed? A journeying spell?" "I think that would be the best," Magus agreed. "It won't take us into the Grove, for its magic would block my magic. But I am familiar with a tavern that is not far from the tower. The tavern is called the Knight of the Rye. Clever, don't you think?" Rayson nodded, appreciating the word play on the Night of the Eye. The night when all 3 moons come together to form an eye in the heavens. Magic was most powerful on such nights. "As you can guess by the name, the tavern used to be frequented by magic users," Magus continued, using the staff to draw a circle in the dust on the floor. "It has now probably been taken over by minotaurs, but the alley across the street is generally deserted. Still, we should be prepared to make a run for it in case any minotaurs see us." "Should I put my hands in my pockets?" Rayson asked, stepping inside the circle. Magus laughed and joined him. Composing himself, he spoke softly to the goddess. "Lunitary, the times are dark, but I hope you can hear us and see us and grant us your blessing." Magus spoke the words to the spell. "Triga bulan ber satuan, seluan asil, Tampat sama terus menarus, waktun jalanil." The hand of the goddess whisked them over mountains, across the plains, and gently set them down in a rubbish-choked alley. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, but the surrounding buildings cut off the light, leaving the alley in shadow. Magus and Raistlin stood frozen, not daring to move until they could take in their surroundings. They waited tensely for someone to yell or gasp or scream at the sight of two mages appearing out of nowhere. When no one did, they relaxed. The alley was deserted, except for the rats scavenging among heaps of refuse. "That is a tavern," said Magus, pointing. They had a good view, for the tavern was directly opposite the alley on the other side of the street. The tavern seemed a welcoming place, with ivy-covered walls, a thatched roof, and lead-paned windows. A garishly painted sign hanging over the entrance read "Night of the Rye," and featured the 3 moons forming a staring eye. The sign painter had added a sheaf of rye in the center of the black pupil, just in case anyone missed the pun. The tavern was typical of neighborhood drinking establishments where friends would gather every night to imbibe ale and share the news. But as they had feared, the only ones currently imbibing ale and sharing the news were the enemy. Minotaurs had the heads of bulls and the lower bodies of humans. They stood 12 feet tall, with massive shoulders, chests, arms, and torsos. They were the favorite race of the god Sargonus, consort of the Dark Queen, who loved them so much he chose a minotaur as his avatar. They could hear raucous shouts and bellows coming from inside the tavern. A gigantic fist smashed through one of the window panes, and the next moment the tavern door burst open and minotaurs flooded the street, waving mugs of ale, shouting and jeering. Raistlin and Magus were close to the tower. Raistlin could see the trees of the grove and the tower rising above them. Their destination was only about a block away, but between them and the tower, the street was filled with drunken minotaurs. "I wonder what all the bellowing is about," Raistlin said. "Perhaps they are leaving." "Sadly, no. They are about to engage in some sort of contest," Magus answered, "and it looks as if we're going to have a front row seat." The minotaurs began forming a circle around 2 brutes who were snarling and growling at each other. A third minotaur entered the ring and appeared to be laying down rules for the contest, ordering the combatants to remove the long curved blades cutlasses both wore on their harnesses. He then pointed to their horns and scowled and shook his head. "They're not going to be allowed to fight with weapons or use their horns," Magus explained in a low voice. "Minotaurs observe a strict code of honor. If they believe they have been insulted, they have the right to challenge their foe to a fight to avenge their honor. They are in many ways like the knights. They even worship Kiri Jolith, as we do, and they honor the knights of Salamnia. They won't hesitate to kill a knight if they encounter one, but they will give him a chance to fight for his life, which is more than they will do to any other human." "Such as us," said Raistlin. "You know a lot about minotaurs." "I encountered one in my test," Magus replied. "Since then I have made a study of them." He said nothing more. Raistlin wondered suddenly if humor had been part of Magus's test, as Caramon had been part of his. The 2 minotaurs clenched their fists and started circling each other, throwing jabs and feints, jeering and stomping their feet. The other minotaurs yelled encouragement and began placing bets. Silver coins flashed in the sunlight. The combatants started pummeling each other, grappling with their arms and slugging each other in the snout. A single blow from the massive fists looked as though it could have knocked down a small building, but neither appeared to be suffering much damage. The fight was, unfortunately, attracting attention. Word spread and minotaurs began converging on the scene to witness it. "We can't stay here," said Raisin. "If one of them sees us, they'll stop fighting each other to attack us." "Perhaps we could get in on the action," said Magus coolly. "I like the chap with the twisted horn." He drew a silver coin from his purse. "Let's go place a bet." "Are you mad? You're going to get us killed," Raisin protested. "Do you have a spell handy?" Magus asked. "It better be a good one." Raisin brought the words of a spell to his mind and recalled the gesture that accompanied it. "Ready?" Magus asked. Raisin nodded. Gripping his staff, Magus strolled calmly out of the alley. The minotaurs had their backs to him, watching the fight. Magus walked up to one and tapped him on the shoulder. The minotaur looked around. Magus held up the silver coin. "Put this one on the snout of that ugly fellow with the curly horn." The minotaur blinked at the coin, then gave a roar that caused the other minotaurs to turn their heads. "Run!" Magus shouted to Raisin. "Make for the grove!" Raisin hiked up his robes and dashed down the street. He ran as fast as he could, for he guessed what was coming. When he deemed he was far enough away, he stopped running and turned around, not wanting to miss the sight, though it could cost him his life. Magus raised his staff high in the air, shouting words of magic. Multiple bolts of lightning streaked from the crystal ball, striking the minotaur, who howled and bellowed in pain. The air was redolent with a rank smell of burnt fur. His spell cast, Magus broke into a run with several outraged minotaurs in hot pursuit. "Your turn!" he shouted. Raisin readied his spell. The magic filled his mind and body, tingled in his blood. As Magus dashed past him, Raisin shouted the words and spread his fingers. "Kalith Karan, Tobaniska!" Flaming darts shot from his fingertips and blazed toward the minotaurs. He did not wait to see the results, but turned and ran. Hearing shrieking, he assumed that at least some of the darts had hit their target. He dashed after Magus, who glanced at him over his shoulder and grinned. "Having fun?" he shouted. Raisin didn't have the breath to answer, but he realized he was having fun. He couldn't believe he was enjoying this madcap adventure, even as he ran for his life with a host of furious minotaurs chasing after him. The dark shadows of the trees of the cursed shuriken grove loomed in front of them. Magus bolted into the grove, and Raisin plunged after, whispering a hasty prayer to Lunitary. He had taken only a few steps when thick and noisome darkness half blinded him, and the first sickening wave of fear washed over him. Raisin stumbled and nearly fell. Recalling the skeletal hands that would reach up from the ground to grab interlopers and drag them to their doom, he clutched desperately at a tree to keep from falling. A limb of the tree snaked down and tried to seize hold of him. Raisin snatched back his hand. The light of the crystal on the staff still burned defiantly. He staggered toward it and saw Magus crouched on his hands and knees. "Once the grove recognizes us, the fear will pass," he said in a tight voice. "Either that or I'll die of it," Raisin thought. The fear had hold of him, wringing every drop of courage from his heart. He could almost wish for death. Suddenly, thankfully, the grove eased its grip. He sagged to his knees, closed his eyes, and drew in deep gulps of air. Magus rose and helped him to his feet. Raisin managed a weak smile and mopped his face with his sleeve. "Oh, the Minotaur's still chasing us," he gasped. "They are standing on the outskirts of the grove. Let's watch. This should be entertaining," Magus remarked. He spoke lightly, but he was clearly still shaken. The Minotaurs knew the grove's evil reputation, and they were apparently debating what to do. Most shook their horned heads, shrugged, and walked off. 3 remained, glowing at the forest and motioning, perhaps trying to goad one another into entering. At last, one of them, either bolder or drunker than the others, drew his cutlass and strode into the shadows. He had gone only a few feet when a tree branch swooped down and struck him on the head. The Minotaur snarled in rage and struck back at the trunk of the tree, slashing it with his cutlass. "Ha! That was a mistake," said Magus. A massive limb dropped from the tree and landed with crushing force on top of the Minotaur, completely burying him in leaves and branches. Figuring that was the end of their pursuer, Racing and Magus were about to turn away when they saw the Minotaur crawl out from under the debris. He had lost a horn and was covered in blood, but he managed to limp back to his fellows before he collapsed. They picked him up and dragged him off. No other Minotaurs dared enter the grove after that. Racing and Magus ventured deeper into the forest. The tangled branches and leaves blotted out the sunlight, turning day to ghastly night. They lost sight of the tower and had no idea where they were going. The air was foul and stank of blood and rotting leaves. Even the magical light of the staff grew weak and feeble, as though it were suffocating. They could see only a foot or so ahead of them. A tree root suddenly snaked out and tried to wrap itself around Magus's ankle. "Stop it, damn you!" Magus cried. "We belong here." He struck his staff on the root, and it released its grip. The grove relented. The branches of the twisted oak trees parted. The sun shone down on a gated fence made of twined silver and gold. The gate swung open, and they could see the tower beyond, a large minaret flanked by 2 smaller ones. The walls of the 3 minarets were made of white marble striated with red. The spires at the tops were black marble. The tower had been hideous to look upon when Racing had entered the gates. The sun had not shone on him, but then he had welcomed the darkness, embraced it. As he gazed up at the glistening white walls, he wondered if some part of him would remember this moment of sunlight when he next walked his dark path. They came to an immense door made of ironwood. The door had no handle and no keyhole. The ironwood was covered in powerful, deadly warding runes, visible only to those who had the gift of magic. The symbols for the 3 moons were carved in the center, a white circle for solinary, a red circle for lunitary, and a dark circle for nuitary. Magus placed his hand palm flat against the symbol of lunitary. "I am Magus. I ask permission of the blessed goddess Lunitary to enter." Racing approached the door. He had served all 3 gods during his lifetime, but he had felt closest to Lunitary. He placed his palm on the symbol of the red moon. "I am Racing Magier. I ask permission of the blessed goddess Lunitary to enter." The runes on the door flashed with blinding red light. The door opened, swinging silently inward. Racing reflected that the last time he had entered as master. This time he was nobody. Chapter 15. The tower's foyer was small, austere, and dark. Magus held up the staff, and its light shone on the floor made the blocks of white, red, and black marble, with the symbol of the eye emblazoned in gold. A spiral staircase led to the upper chambers. They heard the distant chiming of a bell announce their arrival. "We are not permitted to advance farther without an escort," said Magus. "We must wait until an apprentice comes to fetch us." They soon heard the footfalls of someone running down the stairs. A breathless and frightened-looking mage crouched at the end of the hall. "Stop where you are!" The mage was holding a wand made of crystal aimed directly at them. "Who are you, and what do you want?" Raisin had no idea what the wand did, but he was not taking chances. He raised his hands, palms open, to show he was not a threat. Magus regarded the mage with disgust. "Rodolfo, it's me, Magus. What do you mean by pointing that wand at me? You could blow my head off." Rodolfo stared at Magus intently, then lowered the wand, though he continued to regard them with suspicion. "I'm sorry I did not immediately recognize you, Magus, but it's been 10 years, said Rodolfo stiffly. "We have all been on edge since the Minotaurs arrived. Who is your companion?" "Raisin Magir, escort to the daughter of a knight who was forced to flee her home by the Dark Queen's armies." "I'm sorry for your lady, brother," said Rodolfo curtly, "but many of us share a similar fate these days. Why have you come here, Magus? If you are seeking a safe haven, you will not find it here. The tower is under siege." Magus stared at him in disbelief. "Under siege? Who is besieging you? We just saw the grove drop a tree branch the size of a house on a Minotaur. They won't come near this place so long as the master remains here to defend it." "I ask again, what do you want?" Rodolfo said, glowering. "We need to speak to Snagsby," said Magus. "The matter is extremely urgent." "Master Snagsby is not receiving visitors," said Rodolfo. "I guessed as much when I tried to travel through the portals only to find he had closed them," said Magus. "Then you should have taken the hint and stayed away. As it is, you have wasted your time. I bid you a safe journey home." Rodolfo turned on his heel and started back toward the stairs. Magus pointed to the eye on the floor, stepped on it, and motioned for Raisin to join him. Magus tapped on the eye with the staff, and the next instant Raisin found himself standing alongside Magus in the center of a large and elegantly appointed chamber occupied by several apprentices in white robes who were bustling about in frenzied activity. Some were draping cloth over furniture, while others were rolling up the rugs or packing objects into chests, crates, and coffers. Still others were hurriedly pulling books off the shelves and stashing them in wooden crates. They were so intent on their work that none appeared to take notice of their arrival. "What in the abyss is going on?" Magus wondered aloud. As he and Raisin watched in perplexity, two apprentices hurried into the room, one carrying what appeared to be a pair of spectacles, and the other a cloak. "I begin to understand. Those are magical artifacts," said Magus in a low voice to Raisin. "Those two are the goggles of foe-finding and the Vanisher cloak." The two apprentices handed over the artifacts to a third apprentice, who carefully lowered them into a large iron-banded chest. They were followed by a tall man in white robes who began inspecting the chests and criticizing the packing. "That is Snagsby," said Magus. At the sound of his voice, one of the apprentices saw them at last. She gave a gasp. "We have visitors, master." Snagsby quickly turned. Raisin recognized him as one with a politician's face, the sort that could be all things to all people and mean none of them. In this instance, the face was cowling. "Magus, what are you doing here? You are not welcome." "Master Snagsby," said Magus in dulcet tones, making a respectful bow. "It has been a long time since we met." Snagsby was grim. "Not long enough as far as I am concerned. I sealed the portals to keep out visitors. I'm far too busy to deal with you or your companion." He glared at Raisin. "I don't know you. Who are you?" Raisin was about to reply when he was interrupted by Rodolfo, who came running into the room, panting for breath. I'm sorry, master, I tried to stop them. Stay here to escort them out, said Snagsby. Yes, master, said Rodolfo. This way, brothers. I see you are packing, master, said Magus, ignoring Rodolfo. Are you going somewhere? Due to the current crisis, my students and I are moving to the Tower of High Sorcery in Istar, Snagsby replied. We are taking the most valuable artifacts with us. Who is staying to defend the tower? Magus asked. No one, said Snagsby. Far too dangerous. You cannot do this, master, said Magus angrily. If you abandon the tower and leave no one to defend it, Takhisis will seize it. Rodolfo, take these two out and make certain they stay out. Snagsby whipped around to shout at an apprentice. Be careful with those crystal gauntlets. Magus was breathing hard, holding his temper with difficulty. Does the conclave know you are deserting your post? Since you are not a member, that is none of your business, Snagsby said curtly. He strode over to snatch a glass jar from the apprentice. We don't pack the potions in with the scrolls. They might leak. The potions go in the hamper that is lined with straw. Must I do everything myself? Rodolfo plucked at Magus's sleeve. Magus rounded on him. Touch me again, and I will change you into the toad you are. Rodolfo regarded Magus with enmity, but he took a step back. All this while, Raistlin had been observing the artifacts, hoping he would see the device of time journeying among them. Since the device could be in pendant form, he kept particular watch on the jewelry, but he could not locate it. He did notice one of the apprentices gingerly handling a crystal globe and nudged Magus with his elbow to draw his attention to it. Magus stared at it intently. That's it, he said softly. The dragon orb. Do you see the device? Raistlin shook his head. They watched the apprentice carefully slide the dragon orb into a wide velvet bag and gently lower it into a chest. Master Snagsby straightened from his work with the potions. Sighting Magus, he scowled. Why are you still here? He asked sourly. We have just come from the High Clerics' Tower, where the knights intend to make a stand against the armies of the Dark Queen. As you must be aware, master, the knights face a powerful red dragon known as Immolatus, and they have no weapons that will stop him. I'm here to ask you for the loan of the Orb of Dragonkind to aid us in battle. Raistlin was watching the apprentice with a velvet bag. She had not been paying much attention to the conversation up to that point, but at the mention of the High Clerics' Tower, she raised her head in shock and concern. She was a young woman, about 18, with long, straight dark hair. Her features reminded him of someone, though he could not imagine who. Out of the question, said Snagsby. We are taking the orb to Istar, where it will be safe. The orb was not created to be kept safe, said Magus. It was created to fight dragons. To help wizards fight dragons, not knights, Snagsby stated. Where were the knights when Palanthas was attacked? Hiding in their tower, that's where they were. They were riding to free Palanthas when they were attacked by the Red Dragon, said Magus in a low voice, his fist clenched. Many hundreds of knights and refugees died in his flames. The young apprentice put her hand to her mouth. The color drained from her face, and she quickly rose to her feet. I can do nothing for you, Snagsby stated coldly. You have my permission to bring up the matter at the next meeting of the conclave. I bid you goodbye. Rodolfo, I gave you an order. Escort these gentlemen out. I have a question, master, said Raistlin. I am searching for the device of time journeying. Do you know where it is? Never heard of it, said Snagsby. "You must have some knowledge of the device, Master Snagsby," said Raisin. "It is a rare and ancient artifact." "I cannot keep track of all the artifacts on Krynn," said Snagsby snidely. "I know for a fact you are familiar with the device of time journeying, Master," said Magus. "You showed it to me that last time I was here. You were trying to impress me then, as I recall, thinking to ingratiate yourself with my wealthy family, until you discovered that they had disowned me." "I do not know what you are talking about," said Snagsby brusquely. "As for the device, if it was here then, it is not here now. I know nothing about it. I am going to my laboratory to pack up my papers. I expect you to be gone when I return." Snagsby stalked out of the room. Raisin saw two of the apprentices glance at each other. One was a young woman who had reacted so strongly to their news of the attack at the pass. The other was a young man. They spoke softly together, and then both turned to Raisin. "I am Anitra, and this is Kelly. We know of the device," the women said. "The master is right, sir. It is not here. About a year ago he dispatched it to the Tower of Weirith, saying the master of that tower had need of it. Kelly can tell you, for he carried it." "Are you certain it was the device of time journeying, sir?" Raisin asked, tasting the bitterness of despair. "I am truly sorry, brother, for I can tell your need is desperate," said Kelly. "But I know for a fact the device is not here. I carried it to Weirith myself. Let Solinary be my witness." "We could travel to Weirith on the Pass of Magic," Magus suggested, only to see Anitra shake her head. "The master of Weirith has sealed off that tower for fear of attack as well. You would not be able to enter. Besides, the tower can be found only by those the master invites to seek it," Raisin said. "Otherwise, Weirith Forest prevents entry." Rodolfo confronted them. "Since you have no further business here, Magus, you should leave and take your friend with you. If you do not go at once, I will be forced to summon the race." "Return to your duties, Rodolfo. These brothers do not need an escort," said Anitra. "They know the way, and I could use your advice on where to pack the Goodberry bracelet." Rodolfo looked uncertain, clearly not trusting them. "Please, Rodolfo," said Anitra, "I would not want to put it in the wrong place." "Mind you don't trip on the stairs and break your neck," Rodolfo said to Magus. He stalked off, going to inspect the chest. Anitra gave Magus an intense look. "Go," she mouthed, then added, "Trust me." She turned away and went over to speak to Rodolfo. Magus gazed after her, pondering, then said loudly, "Let us leave, brother. There's nothing more we can do here." He and Raisin descended the stairs that wound around the tower's central shaft. Their number seemed endless. Magus caused the globe on his staff to shine in the dark stairwell, and they continued the long trek down. "I am sorry you could not find the device, brother," he said. Raisin nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "When the war is ended, we will petition the master on your behalf, obtain an invitation, and travel to Weirith." "That could take months or longer," said Raisin. "It would be too late. Without the device of time journeying, we are trapped here, and so is the Grey Gem. Our very presence has already changed history to some extent. The longer we remain, the greater the odds that the Grey Gem will do irreparable damage. And what if the worst happens? What if Takisis finds out the Grey Gem is here? She would stop at nothing to try to get her hands on it." "You could take Lady Destina and the Grey Gem to a place of safety," Magus suggested. "And what place on Krynn is safe?" Raisin demanded. "If the High Clerist's tower falls, Takisis will rule all of Solamnia and next, the world." "I notice you say if, brother, and not when," said Magus coolly. "Am I right to assume that the High Clerist's tower will not fall? that Salamnia is saved?" Raisin cursed himself. He had been so upset he had not paid attention to what he was saying. "You may assume what you like," Raisin replied curtly. "Destina wears chaos around her neck. If the knights held the tower then, they might lose it now. I know this much. Win or lose, if Takis acquires the gem, she will become so powerful that not even the other gods will be able to stop her. We cannot let that happen." "Then we have one clear objective, brother," said Magus. "We must prevent the Dark Queen from taking it." They continued down the stairs in silence, each absorbed in his own dark thoughts, and both were intensely startled to see Anitra materialize on the stairs right in front of them. Raisin had the words to a spell on his lips, and Magus raised the staff. "I mean no harm," Anitra said. Magus sighed in relief. "You scared the wits out of me, sister. I thought you were one of Snagsby's race." "I did not mean to startle you," said Anitra, smiling. She held out a white velvet bag. "I wanted to give you the Orb of Dragonkind. I heard you say you needed it to defend the High Clerist's tower." "That is what you meant when you spoke to me," said Magus. "But I fear you risk a great deal, sister. The Master will be furious." Anitra shrugged. "He won't realize it's missing until he reaches Istar." "I am in your debt, sister," said Magus, accepting the bag. Anitra regarded him anxiously. "You know that you must first gain control of the orb before you can use it, and that is highly dangerous. The dragon inside the orb will try to seize control of you." "So I have heard," said Magus. "I am prepared to risk it." "I admire your courage." Anitra smiled. "Here is a book that contains information you will need regarding the orb." Raisin took the book, as Magus opened the velvet bag and peered inside. "I see nothing except a child's marble." "The orb shrinks to protect itself," Anitra replied. "The book explains. I have to ask you a question, brother, before you go. You said the knights were riding to retake Palanthas when the red dragon attacked and killed them." "That is sadly true, sister. They were escorting hundreds of refugees back to Palanthas when the dragon attacked. As far as we know, there were no survivors." Anitra tried to speak and had to pause to clear her throat. "Are you aware? Was a knight named Titus Belgrave among those who died? I ask because he's my father." "Commander Belgrave is your father?" Magus repeated, astonished. "I am Anitra Belgrave. Why? Do you know him? Is he still alive?" "Very much so," said Magus dryly. "He is now in command of the High Clerist's tower. A friend and I are war wizards serving with him." "I am so glad," Anitra said, relieved, "although I gather by your expression that my father is making life difficult for you. He does not have much use for wizards." "That is true," Magus conceded. "I find his distrust strange, considering his own daughter is an apprentice mage." "Father did not approve my choice of profession, but he respected me enough to allow me to pursue it," said Anitra. "You should know that your father is concerned about you," said Raisin. "The commander mentioned that he had made efforts to find if the tower and those within it were safe." Anitra brightened. "Did he? I'm glad." She glanced back up the stairs. "And now I must return to my work before the master misses me." "Please, sister, do you know anything at all about the device of time journeying?" Raisin asked desperately. "Is it possible your fellow apprentice is mistaken?" Anitra shook her head. "I am sorry, brother, but there can be no doubt." "And you are certain the master has closed the tower?" Raisin asked. "Takhisis threatens the world, brother," said Anitra gravely. "Not just our small portion of it." Before she left, she handed each of them a butterfly charm made of silver. These charms will take you safely through the grove. The master usually provides them to visitors, but he's so upset he must have forgotten to give them to you." "I'm certain that must be the case," said Magus with a curl of his lip. Anitra heard the contempt in his voice. "Master Snagsby is not a bad man, only a weak one. And do not fear that Tachisis will seize the Tower of High Sorcery, brothers. We have not yet told the master, but my fellow apprentices and I do not plan to travel to Istar with him. We will remain to defend the tower." "I honor your courage, sister," said Magus, regarding her with admiration. "May the gods of magic fight at your side." "And may they bless both of you and my father, whether he likes it or not," said Anitra. "Tell him I send my love, and that, as he taught me, I will not abandon my duty." She vanished as swiftly as she had come. Magus stood gazing after her a moment before continuing down the stairs. "By lunitary, I would stay and fight with her if I did not have to battle this damned dragon. A handful of apprentice magic users left to confront the Dark Queen. How do you think they will fare? Few living creatures can brave the terror of the grove, but it will not stop Chemosh and his undead." "Nuitari is more than a match for Chemosh," Raisin replied. He knew something of the power of the god of the Dark Moon, having once served him. "The gods of magic will keep the tower safe as long as they can." "Tachisis will first concentrate all her efforts on the High Clerist's tower," said Magus somberly. "But if it falls, then I fear this must fall too." Raisin felt his lungs start to burn. He began coughing and had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Magus waited with him, observing him with grave concern. As the sound of his coughing echoed through the stairwell, Raisin thought he saw eyes peering at him out of the darkness. Probably Snagsby's race. At last, the spasm subsided, and he was able to draw a shuddering breath. "Are you well enough to keep going?" Magus asked worriedly. "I am as well as I will ever be," said Raisin, wiping his lips, "though I admit I am in no hurry to return to my friends. How can I tell them that I have failed to find the device, and we are trapped here to drown in the river of time?" They reached the bottom of the stairs. The door opened of its own accord, as though eager to usher them out. They did not have to brave the terrors of the grove, for Anitra's charm magically whisked them through the forest and deposited them safely on the street. The sun was sliding into the west. The time was late afternoon, and the trees of the grove cast long shadows into empty street. The citizens of Paranthus would be locked in their houses, afraid of venturing out, and the Minotaurs were not likely to come near the grove for a long while. Raisin and Magus walked the deserted street, keeping to the shadows. "Wizards lead lonely lives, as you well know," Magus said, "especially here in Solamnia, where we are regarded with suspicion and distrust. When I first started showing an inclination toward magic, my mother summoned a cleric of Mishakal to heal me. When I saved my money to buy my first spellbook, my father found it and beat me. Huma was the only person who defended me. He fought my battles, but he never truly understood. He asked me before I took the test how I could risk my life for the magic." Magus smiled at Raisin. "All this is my way of saying that I take pleasure in talking with someone who does understand me. This is very selfish of me, brother, but I am a selfish sort of person. I'm glad you will be staying." Raisin was pleased and touched. Like Magus, he had never had a friend who knew the warmth of the flame of the gods. "I was more fortunate growing up," Raisin said. "When my parents died, my older sister, Kitiara, took over raising us. she realized my twin brother Caramon and I would need some way to make a living. She taught Caramon to wield a sword, and she found a wizard who ran a mage school and persuaded him to take me on as a pupil. "Your sister sounds like an extraordinary person," said Magus. "She was," said Raisin. "She ended up serving the Dark Queen." Magus raised an eyebrow. "What of your brother?" "Caramon is a good man, honest and true. He loved me better than I deserved, but, as you said, he never understood." Raisin paused, then added quietly, "I'm not certain I wanted him to." Magus nodded in understanding. They both thrust their hands into the sleeves of their robes and continued on down the street. The tavern, the Knight of the Rye, came into sight, and they halted in the shadow of a building near the alley to survey the situation. The contest in the street must have ended, for there were no minotaurs around, and a large quantity of blood on the cobblestones. They could hear a raucous party going on inside the tavern, perhaps the victor celebrating. "I wonder if I won any money," Magus remarked. "I should step inside to inquire." "I believe you are just mad enough to do it," said Raisin. Magus laughed. "I would if I did not have this dragon orb in my care." They were about to continue on when they caught sight of a minotaur pounding down the street, coming their direction. For a moment they feared he was coming after them, but he ran past them without a glance and barreled inside the tavern, nearly taking the door off its hinges. He bellowed an alarm, and the next moment 20 or more drunken minotaurs bolted from the tavern, pushing and shoving. Those who could still walk staggered off as fast as they could manage. Others made the attempt, but did not get far before they collapsed onto the street. Some had friends who assisted them to their feet. Others were left to lie where they had fallen. "What is going on?" Raisin asked. "That brute warned them that a Minotaur shore patrol is coming," said Magus. "Don't worry, they're not here to arrest us, but they will be if they see us, so we had better retreat to the alley." 6 Minotaurs came marching down the street. They wore cutlasses on their harnesses and carried truncheons and clubs. 2 entered the tavern and dragged out a human, probably the owner, in chains. The other 4 pursued the Minotaurs, who were either too drunk or too slow to escape. When they caught them, they beat them with their truncheons, then howled them away. Before leaving, the Minotaurs shut down the tavern, scrawled an X on the door, padlocked it, and then continued on their rounds. "Minotaurs won't tolerate drunkenness," Magus explained. "Sargonus teaches that it shows a lack of self-discipline. Fortunate for us, for now we can escape without being observed and take our grateful leave of Palanthas." Magus cleared the trash from the alley and drew a circle on the pavement in the muck, and he and Raisin stepped inside. He cast the journeying spell, and they stood once again in the silent and deserted library of the High Clerist's Tower. "Are you tired after our adventures?" Magus asked. "Not particularly," said Raisin. "Good. Come with me to the High Lookout. The view is spectacular." He held out the staff. Raisin grasped it, and they rose up a narrow spiral staircase to the top floor of the High Clerist's Tower. Circular in shape, the High Lookout was open to the air. A wall designed to resemble a crown formed a decorative and protective barrier. A smaller tower, known as the Kingfisher's Nest, rose from the center. "When I was here, sentries manned the High Lookout," Magus remarked. "I would guess the commander does not have men enough to post them." Magus and Raisin leaned their elbows on the wall and gazed out over the plains to the mountains beyond. Magus did not seem inclined to talk, and for his part, Raisin was glad to remain silent, thinking about how he was going to break the news to his companions. They watched the sun sink down into the mountains, leaving all but the afterglow. The sky above them was clear and dotted with faint stars. On the plains below, they could see what looked like countless orange stars shining luridly in the darkness. Enemy bonfires. "There are a great many more tonight than last night," Magus observed, "and there will be twice this number tomorrow night, and more the next. At least, we have the dragon orb. I have been considering how to use it. The wizards who created the orbs summoned evil dragons to the tower, then killed them with lethal magics. I plan to do the same. I will stand here in the high lookout, then command the orb to summon Immolatus and the rest of the Dark Queen's dragons, and I will kill them with my magic." "You leave out one important point," said Raisin. "Legions of powerful spellcasters used the dragon orbs when the dragons attacked the Tower of High Sorcery. There are only 2 of us, and the gods know how many dragons." "2 of us? Are you saying you will fight at my side?" Magus asked, pleased. "I will, as long as a good 20 feet separates us," Raisin said. "I do not want to be in the range of your sizzling goblin." Magus laughed. "I'll wager you 50 silver I hit the dragon with my first spell." "A safe bet, since you know we have no hope of surviving this encounter," Raisin retorted. "Like I said, we are vastly outnumbered." "Perhaps you're right," said Magus quietly, gazing into the stars. "But imagine what it will feel like to summon the lightning from the clouds and hurl blazing bolts at our foe. If we die, we will die with the glory of Lunitary shining down on us and the flame of the magic in our hearts. We will die with the magic burning in our blood." Raisin did not trust himself to reply, for, according to history, Magus would not die the glorious death he envisioned. He would die a terrible death by torture in the dragon's camp. Raisin wondered what would happen to history if Magus did not die. He was, after all, only a drop in the river of time. History celebrated humor, but only wizards remembered Magus, whereas the world might remember him standing atop the high lookout, hurling thunderbolts at a dragon. "But first I must gain control of the dragon orb," Magus was saying. "I will return to my bedchamber with it, for I'm not likely to be disturbed there. Do you know anything about controlling a dragon orb?" Raisin knew a great deal about the subject. The horrifying memories of his fight to control a dragon orb were tinged with mist, and he left them buried, shrouded in time. "If I didn't know, my experience wouldn't help you," said Raisin. "Each mage must fight this battle alone." "I'm not looking forward to it," Magus admitted. "As Anitra told us, it is said to be a terrifying ordeal. Meantime, we must keep the dragon orb a secret. We say nothing to anyone." "As far as my friends are concerned, I went to the Tower of High Sorcery to seek the device of time journeying and failed," Raisin said. Magus rested his hand on Raisin's shoulder in silent commiseration. They left the high lookout. The magic of the staff floated them down the stairs to the 6th floor. "Thank you for accompanying me," said Magus. "I'm sorry you did not find what you sought, but I enjoyed our adventure. Those minotaurs who tried to enter the grove are probably still running." "They must be halfway to Mythos by now," Raisin agreed, smiling. "Good night, brother." Magus clasped Raisin's hand, then entered his bedchamber and closed the door. Raisin went to his own room and lit the lantern. He knew he should go break the bad news to his friends, who must be waiting impatiently to hear. They would already be worried because he had been gone far longer than he had told them. But he was too tired to deal with their despair. He had to first get over his own. After all, he reflected ruefully, it's not as if I needed to rush. None of us are going anywhere. Someone, probably Destina, had been thoughtful enough to leave him a tray of food. He ate a little and drank some wine, then sat down to memorize his spells. But the only words he could hear were those that had been spoken by mages. He could picture both of them standing on the top of the High Clerist's tower, bathed in Lunitary's blessed light, hurling flame and lightning as the dragons swooped down on them. To die with the magic burning in our blood, Raisin murmured. Chapter 16. Tasselhoff was accustomed to spending the night in jail cells, and he'd been glad to have a chance to see the prison cells in the High Clerist's tower, since he had not seen them the last time he was here. He would have enjoyed them more if he had been viewing them from the outside, however, not the inside. The dungeons were certainly everything he had expected. The cells were neat and clean. He had a fresh straw mattress on a cot, not the floor, and a blanket that didn't smell of cat pee. But he soon discovered that while this dungeon was certainly more comfortable than most, it was also more boring. When he was locked up with his fellow Kender, they had lots of fun dumping out their pouches, comparing interesting treasures, and hearing about one another's adventures. In this cell, he was alone. The iron door had a barred grate at the top, but he was so short that to see through the grate, he had to drag the cart to the door and stand on it, only to discover there wasn't anything to see except more iron doors with grates. He tried talking to the jailer, but the jailer was in a bad mood. He'd been severely reprimanded by Will for letting the elf escape. "At least she got out of this death trap," the jailer had said. "When the dragon gets here, the rest of us are going to die in this god-forsaken place."
"If you just talk to the gnomes," Tass had shouted from his cell. "They have Dragonlances."
But neither man had paid any attention to him, or maybe they couldn't hear him. Then he had heard Will leave, and everything was quiet. Tass sighed deeply. The jailer had taken away his pouches, so he didn't have anything to occupy his mind, and he began to think it was time to leave. Not only was the jail cell boring, it was preventing him from saving the song. Someone had to go find the Dragonlances, and although he'd repeatedly told people where to look, none of them appeared to be interested in pursuing the matter. The task fell to him. A favorite Kender saying is, "When the jail cells get boring, the boring get going." Tass had foreseen that he might need a way out, and while the jailer had been trying to untangle the straps of the Kender's pouches and pick up those Tass had dropped and take away pouches that Tass kept taking back, Tass had managed to slip his lock-picking tools out of a pouch and shove them down his socks. Retrieving the tools, he selected one, inserted it into the lock, and heard the most satisfying sound in the world, the click of a lock opening. Tass had waited to leave until he saw the jailer walking past his cell carrying a tray of food. While the jailer was opening the door to the other prisoner's cell, Tass sneaked out. He was tempted to snag at least a couple of his pouches, which were hanging on hooks on the wall, but then he heard the jailer returning. To save time on long explanations about why he couldn't stay locked up when he had to save the song, Tass grabbed his hopak and his magical turtle water jug, borrowed the jailer's lantern, and made a run for it. He didn't have to worry about retrieving Goblin Slayer, which the jailer had locked in a cabinet, for he knew the knife would retrieve him. Tass lighted the lantern and dashed up the stairs to the first floor of the High Clerist's tower. He spent several moments getting lost, then finally located the way they'd come in, which mages had called the Noble's Gate. The huge ironwood doors at the tower's entrance were bolted shut. That should not have been a problem, and Tas was mildly excited about the prospect of picking the lock until he realized with a sigh that it was a deadbolt, and no candor lock-picking ever made could force it open. He had to find another way out. He wandered about with a lantern and came across a room somewhere between Noble's Gate and another called Merchant's Gate that appeared promising. Gilt lettering on the door stated that it was named Sacristy. The door to the room was locked, but the lock was so simple it was almost an insult. Tas opened the door and walked inside. He had lost track of time while in the jail cell, and he was disappointed when he peered out a window to find that night had arrived when he wasn't looking. Nights were good times for adventures, but they also tended to be dark, which made it difficult to find one's way around. Tas was lucky this night, however, for he had the lantern and solinary was shining brightly, so that once he managed to escape, he would be able to see where he was going. The room was extremely interesting, for it contained beautiful robes hanging from pegs, a great many volumes of books, helms and other pieces of armor and weapons, wooden chests that were closed and locked, a desk, and a door that led outside. This door was not locked, rather to his disappointment, so all he had to do was push it open. He regretted he didn't have time to see what interesting things were inside the chests, but he had to save the song. He had his new hoopak for the road, and, patting his belt, he was glad to find Goblin Slayer had not abandoned him. He wasn't particularly worried about being attacked by goblins or kobolds or hobgoblins. He was far more concerned about defending himself from the gnomes. For while gnomes were the meekest, mildest people on the face of Krynn, there was no getting around the fact that, with the possible exception of dragons, gnomes were also the most dangerous. Gnomes didn't mean to be a danger to life and limb. They didn't harm people intentionally. They just had an unfortunate tendency to have accidents, not to mention mishaps, disasters, catastrophes, and calamities. If you happened to be in the vicinity during one of these accidents, it was not conducive to a long life, as Tanis would say. According to legend, gnomes were a people originally called the Smiths, whose skills in forging and inventing had led them to the worship of the forger god Reorx. The god loved the Smiths and showered them with blessings. Unfortunately, the Smiths grew prideful and told Reorx to take a hike. That, understandably, angered the god. He cursed all gnomes with an insatiable desire to invent things, and then added insult to injury by stating that none of their inventions would ever, under any circumstances, work. Given this, Tas might have wondered about the ability of gnomes to invent the first Dragonlances, but since Uncle Trapspringer was involved, Tas was confident that the Trapspringer genius would go far to overcome any gnomish deficiencies. Tas enjoyed the outing. The night was fine, and the road that ran through the foothills across the plains was deserted. He could see the campfires of the Red Dragon's army, but those were east of him, and he was traveling west. The High Clerist's tower was behind him, and it looked very beautiful with the light of solinary shining on it, as though it was made of silver. He continued walking, and when he calculated he was far enough away from the tower that the commander wouldn't be likely to come after him, Tas sat down beneath a tree to rest his eyes. As always happened whenever he was resting his eyes, he fell asleep. When he woke, it was morning. The sun was up, the birds were singing. The sunlight filtered through the branches of the trees, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves. Tas took a drink from his magical water jug and ate some bread and meat he'd found on the jailer's desk, and didn't think the jailer would miss, then continued on his way. He soon encountered a perplexing dilemma. Reaching the top of a hill, he saw that the road branched off in 2 different directions. He didn't have the map with him, and he had no idea what road to take to find the gnome village. He sat down to rest and tried to figure out which way to go. He had just decided to take the road to the northwest when he heard a hubbub of voices coming from the far side of the hill. Tas's first instinct was to race to the top of the hill to see what was on the other side. His second was to recall that Tanis had often warned him to look before he leaped. Having found this to be sound advice in the past, Tas slipped stealthily through the brush until he reached the top of the hill and could see what was going on. The voices didn't sound like goblin voices, though it was hard to tell, for there were a great many of them, and they were all talking at once. He could also hear other sounds: clanks, rumbles, clatters, clangs, whirs, belches, hissing, and the occasional whistle. Reaching the top of the hill, he looked down to see an astonishing sight. A veritable army of gnomes stood clustered around what appeared to be an enormous contraption. A gigantic ballista, made of steel and as big as a tree, was bolted onto a large box that was also made of steel and as big as a smallish house. The contraption was apparently meant to be propelled over the ground by a great many wheels, which were lined up in rows underneath. At least, Tas could see that was the plan, but the wheels weren't turning, and the contraption wasn't moving despite the clouds of steam pouring out of a large tank affixed to the back. Some of the gnomes were standing around the contraption, kicking the wheels, while several more gnomes were peering down at them from the window of a castle-like turret mounted at the front of the contraption. These gnomes were yelling at the gnomes kicking the wheels. Tas grabbed his hopak and ran down the hill to get a closer look.
"Hello there!"
he yelled, waving his hopak. The gnomes stopped kicking at the wheels of the contraption and turned to stare at him. Then they began a lengthy discussion about whether he was a friend or foe, and if he was a foe, what they should do about him, and if he wasn't, did it matter? This was followed by a show of hands, after which a gnome wearing a long leather apron over his shirt and breeches came to speak to him.
"We have decided you are a friend,"
said the gnome. He was short and stocky, with white hair and a soft white curly beard. He wore the usual look of harried intensity common to gnomes.
"I am a friend," said Tas, pleased. "My name is Tasselhoff Barefoot."
The gnome made a bobbing bow and launched into his name, and Tas realized at once he'd made a dreadful mistake. Every gnome's name is a record of that particular gnome's family history, dating back to the Age of Dreams, and could easily fill up several larger leather-bound volumes. It would take this gnome probably a day and a half to get through it.
"Short version,"
said Tas hurriedly. The gnome started off again, and Tas recalled that each gnome had 3 names: the long version, the shortened version of the long version, and the short version of the short version.
"The shortest short name,"
Tas specified.
"Nopple,"
said the gnome. They shook hands. Tas regarded the contraption with admiration.
"That's a wonderful ballista, Nopple. I've never seen a ballista that big or made out of steel, with all those gears and levers and those big pointy things on top." "You've never seen a ballista like this because it's not a ballista,"
said Nopple, sounding peeved. Tas had not been around gnomes in a long time, and had forgotten that they talked extremely fast, especially when they were excited.
"I don't want to hurt your feelings, Nopple," But you need to slow down when you talk, said Tass. I can't understand you when you smash all the words together.
Nubble heaved an exasperated sigh. His face was wrinkled up like a walnut, but that wasn't necessarily a sign of old age. Almost all gnome faces were wrinkled. Gnomes claimed their wrinkles came from deep thinking, but Tass considered it more likely the wrinkles came from scrunching up their faces to avoid being injured by the blasts.
I said you've never seen a ballista like it because it's not a ballista, said Nubble.
What is it? Tass asked and instantly knew he'd made another mistake, because Nubble proudly lounged into the name of the contraption.
Revolutionary steam-powered bang-bang-boom howitzer spear hurler, dragon killer, and aerial pyrotechnic display.
Stop, said Tass. Nubble stopped. What does it do? Tass asked.
I was just telling you,
said Nubble.
I don't have a lot of time, Tass explained. Some of my friends are trapped inside the High Clearance Tower, about to be attacked by a very fierce dragon, and I need to save them and the song. Then this weapon is exactly what you're looking for,
stated Nubble, and all the gnomes standing around them broke into applause.
We are on our way to that very tower in order to save the knights.
With a ballista? Tass asked doubtful.
It's not a ballista!
Nubble yelled. I beg your pardon, said Tass contritely. What is it?
The dragon spear pike, javelin, bayonet, harpoon, bolt, corkscrew, lance,
Nubble began.
A Dragonlance,
Tass cried excitedly, understanding the first word and the last.
I had always heard that you gnomes had invented them, and I was on my way to your village to tell you the knights really need them. Dragonlance,
Nubble repeated several times, rolling the words on his tongue. He looked at his fellow gnomes. Several nodded their heads, and they began to discuss the new name. This took some time, and another show of hands. Nubble turned to Tass.
We consider that the term Dragonlance is simplistic, but it does have a ring to it. Therefore, we have agreed to refer the new name to the Committee on Honorifics, Epithets, Labels, and Monikers. You'll receive a memo.
Tass eyed the contraption dubiously. The Dragonlance that was a ballista, that wasn't a ballista, was indeed a fearsome-looking weapon. The wooden shaft, that was about the size of a tree, sported a variety of wicked-looking blades.
The blades rotate,
said Nubble, seeing Tass studying them.
It's really a very remarkable weapon, said Tass, but I don't mean to hurt your feelings. It's not a Dragonlance.
Nubble took offense.
How would you know what is or is not a Dragonlance, since we are the ones who invented it, and no one has ever seen one before? He added with a snort. Everyone's a critic.
Tass started to say he had seen a Dragonlance before. He'd seen lots of Dragonlances, but then it occurred to him that the Dragonlances he had seen were in the future, during the War of the Lance. Perhaps this was what Dragonlances looked like in the time of humor.
How does it work?
Tass asked to mollify the irate gnome.
That's the problem,
said Nubble, his shoulders slumping.
At the moment, it doesn't.
The other gnomes shook their heads and went back to arguing and kicking the wheels.
What is it not doing?
Anything, said Nubble, which wasn't much help. Tass tried again.
What's it supposed to be doing?
Nubble brightened and gave Tass a tour of the contraption, proudly displaying the finer points.
We made the Dragonlance far more efficient than a ballista by removing the need for torsion prods and tension springs and replacing those with blasting caps and gunpowder.
Tass did his best to look impressed, though he had no idea what a torsion prod was, or a tension spring, or a blasting cap for that matter.
As you see here, Nuppel continued, the Dragonlance has various spearheads, which are interchangeable depending on the type of dragon. We have color-coded them for easy reference based on the type of dragon: fuchsia, lavender, puce, mauve, and mustard. I never heard of a mustard dragon, said Tas.
Nuppel glared at him.
They're extremely ferocious, although not as ferocious as mauve. Do you want to know how this works or not?
Tas would have liked to have heard more about puce and fuchsia dragons, but he didn't want to upset the gnome.
Please go on. What does that big kettle do? That is the boiler. It generates steam that turns the gears, that drives the wheels, that propel the machine across the ground. At least,
he added, heaving a sigh, that's the theory. Tas could now see the problem. The boiler was furiously boiling and belching steam, but the wheels weren't turning, and he didn't think kicking them would be likely to help.
Why don't you push it?
Tas asked. Nuppel's eyes widened to such an extent that his eyebrows nearly flew off his head.
Push it! He repeated in horror. Did you say push it?
The other gnomes were equally horrified, and one fainted dead away in shock at the very idea.
The Dragonlance travels under its own steam, said Nuppel. It is not meant to be pushed.
He said the word with an explosive emphasis.
But there are more than enough of you, Tas pointed out, and I'll be glad to help. And if we all get behind it and put our shoulders into it.
2 more gnomes fainted from shock, and Nuppel had to sit down and lower his head between his knees. Tas shared some of the water from his magical turtle shell and patted Nuppel on the back, and eventually he revived.
We can't push it, he said weakly. According to Professor Trapspringer.
Who? Tas interrupted.
Professor Trapspringer,
Nuppel repeated.
The professor was instrumental in the design and the development of this weapon, with particular emphasis on the pyrotechnic part of the invention. Not only will our weapon slay dragons, it puts on a spectacular aerial display in the process. He was quite adamant that on no account were we to push it, or pull it for that matter.
Tas had no idea what pyrotechnics were, but he knew better than to ask. He had more important concerns.
Tell me about Professor Trapspringer. Is he still in your village? Could I meet him? We're related, you see. He's my uncle.
The gnomes regarded him with deep and profound sorrow. They all shook up their hats, and Tas heard murmurs of,
"Sorry for your loss. Regrettable incident. Unfortunate accident. And a pity he was standing so close."
All of which was soothing but of no help.
"Where is Professor Trapspringer?"
Tas asked.
"Ah, that's the question," said Nuppel sadly. "Only a few days ago, he was standing on that very platform about to launch what we will now call the Dragonlance, at least until we hear back from the committee, and the next he wasn't."
"Wasn't what?" Tas was confused.
"Standing on the platform," said Nuppel. "We believed the explosion had something to do with his sudden disappearance, and thus we referred the matter to the Committee on Safety in the Workplace Environment. Their initial findings were that he had been hoisted on his own petard."
"What's a petard?"
Tas asked. "We have no idea. That went back to committee," said Nuppel.
Tas was sad to think he had come so close to meeting Uncle Trapspringer, and had apparently missed him by only a few days. Still, he was proud to think that Uncle Trapspringer had played a role in the invention of the Dragonlance, as Kender history had recorded. He looked forward to informing Sturm and Raistlin, who had often spoken insultingly of Uncle Trapspringer. But first, he had to figure out how to haul the Dragonlance to the High Clerist's tower. Tas didn't dare bring up pushing the contraption again, for they had just managed to revive the gnomes who had passed out. While he was thinking, Nopal and the gnomes went back to work. They crawled under the device and inside it and on top of it. They unrolled large charts and diagrams and spread them on the ground and got into heated arguments, while others hammered and prodded and poked the contraption.
"Can I help?"
Tas offered.
"Do you know anything about internal combustible engines?"
Nopal asked.
"No,"
Tas admitted.
"How about carburetors?"
"Sorry," said Tas.
"Then what good are you?"
Nopal demanded with a snort. He eyed the contraption.
"I think we should disassemble it and start over."
"No," Tas cried, alarmed.
"I mean, you can't. All this work for nothing? Let's have a show of hands. Who doesn't want to disassemble the Dragonlance?"
The gnomes were about to vote when a whistle sounded.
"Breakfast!"
Nopal shouted, and the gnomes all piled out of the contraption and quit kicking the wheels. There appeared to be considerable consternation among them. After some discussion, one came to Nopal to report.
"We can't find the food. We seem to have left it behind. I blame the members of the Culinary and Knife Sharpening Committee, but they claim it's not their fault. They left it to a subcommittee, the sous chefs and pastry cooks, who deny all responsibility. We therefore suggest that a group be detailed to go bag a deer."
This received unanimous support. The gnomes invited Tas to go hunting with them, but as he watched them arm themselves with sinister-looking weapons they called thundersticks, he decided that it would be conducive to a long life to politely decline the invitation. Several gnomes traipsed off into the woods, and their departure was soon followed by the sounds of explosions and a couple of yelps of pain. The gnomes returned with what they called a deer, but which Tas could clearly see was a milk cow with a bell around her neck. The cow was, fortunately, still alive and in better shape than many of the gnomes, who were bleeding profusely. Nopal summoned the Butchers, Bakers, and Candlestick Makers Committee and instructed them to carve up the deer. Tas felt called upon to point out their mistake.
"That's not a deer, it's a cow." "No,"
said Nopal, shocked.
"Are you certain?"
"It's mooing," said Tas.
"It is to a deer,"
several of the hunters shouted. This resulted in a heated argument. The butchers were prepared to go to work on the cow when the irate farmer arrived carrying a pitchfork. He aimed it in a threatening manner at the gnomes and accused them of stealing his cow.
"You claim it is your cow, and we claim it is our deer," said Nopal. "We are nothing if not fair-minded, and we will refer this matter to the court of law once we find it. The court went missing after the great blast of '33, and none of us have seen a lawyer since, though we continue to look. In the meantime, we will retain the contested animal as evidence."
The farmer went red in the face and began to jab at Nopal with a pitchfork. The other gnomes scattered while Nopal sought refuge underneath the wheels of the Dragonlance. "Come out from under there!" the farmer shouted, trying to skewer Nopal with a pitchfork. Nopal rolled one way and the other, but Tas could see that sooner or later the pitchfork was going to win. He jumped on the contraption and, not knowing what else to do, flipped a switch. The Dragonlance gave a great belch of steam. Whistles blew, gears clanked, pistons plunged, cranks cranked, and the wheels started to turn. The Dragonlance was on the move. Both the cow and the farmer took one look at it and ran the other direction. Tas leaped off and managed to pull Nopal out from under the wheels mere seconds before the Dragonlance would have rumbled over him.
You did it, Tas cried, throwing his arms around the gnome. It works!
Well, of course it works, said Nupple testily. What else did you expect?
By now, the Dragonlance had picked up speed and was rolling along at a pretty good clip. Nupple jumped onto the platform and Tas scrambled up beside him. Then he and Nupple assisted the rest of the gnomes to climb on board. Nupple took his place in the turret and called on Tas to join him.
Marvelous view from here.
Tas climbed into the turret and looked at his surroundings.
That large building you see over there is the Highclare's Tower,
Tas said, forced to shout to be heard over the bells and whistles.
That's where the knights are trapped. You need to steer the Dragonlance in that direction.
Nupple suddenly looked concerned. Tas saw the gnome's eyebrows quiver, and he got a sinking feeling somewhere around his kneecaps.
You can steer this, can't you?
He asked.
Ah, as to that,
said Nupple,
I believe I received a memo right before we started from the Committee on Steering Wheels, Drive Shafts and Seat Belts.
The gnome fished about in his shirt, removed a piece of paper from his pocket, unfolded it, read it, folded it up, and put it back in his pocket.
No,
he said.
No what?
Tas asked uneasily.
What do you mean, no? I mean, no, we can't steer it,
Nupple replied with a shrug.
The committee looked into it and didn't find the initial plan feasible, and we referred the matter back to committee for more work. We expect an updated memo any day now.
Tas looked out across the plains and saw hills and gullies and ravines and, very far in the distance, fires from the dragon's armies. They were headed away from the Highclare's Tower and straight toward the enemy. Even Tas could see that was not going to be conducive to a long life.
How do you stop this thing?
Tas shouted.
Stop it?
Nupple glared at him, outraged.
We just got it started. Why would you want to stop it?
Tas had no good answer to this, without explaining about Tanis and conducivity, if that was a word. Nupple was standing in the turret of the Dragonlance, with the wind blowing through his few sparse hairs, grinning from one large ear to the other. The other gnomes were happily riding on the Dragonlance, hooting and cheering, except for the three who had tumbled off when the wheels ran over a rock and were now running along frantically behind, trying to catch up. The Dragonlance thundered along, belching and whistling. Tas decided to just enjoy the ride.
Where are we going?
He yelled.
To find a dragon,
Nupple yelled back.